6 commands that we've been teaching on. And these commands are basic principles that we believe that God invites us into, that we are called to obey, but they're an invitation to a way of living. And if you haven't been here the last few weeks, just a quick general recap. So we've talked about basically how we've boiled down the Gospels, the 4 books where Jesus' life and ministry was lived out, and then a couple verses in Acts before he ascends to heaven. We've boiled them down to 6 core commands, right? So most of you guys have been here almost every week, so we're just going to try and start yelling them out. If it's okay, if they're not in order. So name one command we've done recently. Someone. A little bit louder. Be perfect, all right? Steve? Love people is the command. A for effort, all right? Someone else? Love God. There we go, guys. These are not hard, right? Jesus says to follow me. There we go. All right, good. So those are the 4 we've talked about so far. Today's command we're going to highlight is called go everywhere. And the idea and the intentionality behind each of these commands is that you and I would live lives to the fullest, and we do that as we choose to obey the commands that Christ has given us. These basic things. So if you read through the Gospels and you read about Jesus' life, everything he says falls under one of these 6 categories. Everything. And then the hardest thing for us, because we are such practical people, especially us in the Western side, we look around and we say, okay, we understand that Jesus says, follow me, but what does that mean? We know what God says to love God and to love people. What does that mean? Be perfect sounds incredibly daunting. What does it mean? And so we've given you these 12 pathways, these ways that we choose to walk life out in this path to pursuing what it looks like to become more like Jesus. We do that as we look to become like Christ, and we do it in community with each other. And so there are practical things that we're talking about within these commands every week, because as we walk in these 12 pathways, we are actually obeying these 6 core commands as a way of our life. And so we talked about the pathways back in the fall. If you ever want to go back and look at it, we did a whole series called Disciple. And this idea that we want to become disciples of Christ. We don't just simply want to punch our heaven card, right? That's not what we're here for. We are here because we want to be transformed disciples, people that are actively looking to become like Christ each and every day. And so the command of go everywhere, I had a fascinating conversation with a pastor friend of mine this week. He was talking about the fact that his church has actually just recently been doing some different stuff with evangelism and things like that. And we had this whole conversation around the fact that it's amazing to both of us how so often the people in our churches, in American churches today, view evangelism as inviting someone to church, and then from there, the church takes over. Hey, come and sit next to me at a service. Get what you ever need to get from that church service, and then they'll take over from there. They'll help plug you into a small group. They'll give you a volunteer opportunity. They'll tell you more about discipleship, and I'll be excited to see what God does for you through them, right? And we joke about this, but at the end of the day, we have become incredibly lazy when it comes to sharing the gospel. If I could just use one word, it would be laziness. Because we truly think that it's someone else's job to share the gospel. We think that it's someone else's job, that if I invited someone to a service, if I invite someone even to a missional community, that from there, my missional community leaders, they'll be the ones to help share the gospel with them. They'll be the ones to help grow them in the walk of Christ, help introduce them to the faith. I'm just going to be here as the friend who's like, hey, I brought you. But that's the extent of my evangelism, right? And evangelism, if you've grown up in church culture at all, heck, just been exposed to Christianity in general over the last couple decades, it has gone in so many different directions, right? You've seen or probably experienced at some point in your life the guy with the signs, right? Or like the megaphone on the street corner who's like yelling about sin and wrath and going to hell. And there's that form of evangelism, right? And I would argue that not an effective way of evangelism, but there's that is that person's version of evangelism, right? You've got people who preach obviously through television, through radio ads, whatever it is. There's all these different things out there. And what happens is that we've seen other people do this evangelism, and as a result, we think to ourselves, there's enough opportunities. If they really wanted Jesus, right? Like, there's enough chances for them to find it. It doesn't have to be me. And so part of the command to go everywhere that we're going to kind of walk through this morning is this idea there's two major portions to this command. That really we're calling you to go and to make disciples, right? It's the Great Commission. There's this passage in Scripture found in a couple of different places where Jesus basically sends out his disciples as he sends us out as Christ followers today. There's two parts to it. There's the go portion, which we're going to talk about first, and then there's the make disciples portion, okay? So I just want to read the main passage this morning. We're going to read from is from Mark. I want to read from first. And this is Jesus. He says to them, go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. There's this go into all the world piece and the preach the gospel. Make disciples is what Matthew 28 says in the Great Commission. They're both the same thing. It's this idea, not that preaching is this idea like what I'm doing right now, but as your life should exemplify this posture of that the gospel is at work. One of the old theologians back in the early centuries of the church said this phrase, and I love it, right? He says, preach the gospel often, but use words when necessary. Preach the gospel often, but use words when necessary. It's this idea that as you live your life, like the video we watched this morning, as you go, may your life be exemplifying the gospel. May the very actions that you take be preaching the good news. And there's a phenomenal book out there not long ago that I read from a friend, actually wrote it. And it's this whole idea that he took about 30 to 40 different stories from places all over the world about what does the good news look like in your context. Right? Like we understand theologically what the good news is, right? That Jesus came and lived a perfect life. He died on the cross for our sins. He resurrected, and then he sends us out as his church, right? That's the gospel in a nutshell. But what does the good news look like in Virginia Beach? What does the good news look like at your place of work? What does the good news look like at your school? What does the good news look like in your marriage? What does the good news look like to your children? What does it look like in your neighborhood, right? Let's get real practical today about what does it mean to have the good news, right? We believe that the good news is something that is designed to be shared, right? And so part of this first aspect I want us to look at is the go portion. So this may seem obvious to us, right? But the word go is actually like an intentional movement word, right? Like to go everywhere. It's this idea that you cannot sit still and obey this command, right? By default, let's just get very, very practical here. The idea of go requires movement. And movement requires intentionality in the situation. Let's look at the life of Jesus, for example. Jesus, right? He was a highly intentional creature. Sometimes we had this aurora around who God is that we sometimes think to ourselves, well, he was Jesus, so he was perfect, so everywhere he went, people just gathered and they did whatever he said, and it was awesome, right? That's not the gospel. That's not the idea that we see. Jesus prayed and asked the Father, what are the 12 disciples you want me to have? Right? The night before he goes out and starts recruiting these disciples, he prayed and was strategic about who he selected. And then as he went in his ministry, there were dozens and hundreds of people, thousands over the life of his ministry, the 3 years that he spent, that did not agree with him or only wanted portions of it, right? They kind of copied and pasted certain parts they liked in their life, but the rest they kind of cut out, right? And so Jesus was not this figure that all of a sudden, yes, he was attractive. People were constantly attracted to him. He was a magnet of that society, but he did not always say things that everyone liked, and so people did not always stick around. So the life of Jesus was highly strategic. It was highly intentional, and everywhere he went, he was intentional. And with that intentionality carried this love, this grace, this mercy, this idea of the good news. Think about it. The harshest words that we ever see Jesus express are for religious leaders and for the disciples. Those are the two camps of people where Jesus is pretty blunt, even angry and frustrated at times. But when he says something very truthful, like let's just say the woman at the well, for example, right? This woman who's living a lifestyle that Jesus does not condone, but he's incredibly truthful, but at no point is he harsh. He's loving, but he doesn't hold back the truth. And sometimes in our society today, we have this idea that as we go everywhere, that it's either bring the truth or I can bring the love. But Philip, I can't do both, right? Like I can either be loving to my coworkers and just let them do whatever they want to do and live their life however they want to live, or I can be truthful. And man, I would love to be truthful some days, right? I want to tell them exactly how I feel and what's going on. But as the guy in the video, Paul, as he shared this idea that we have this concept sometimes that this idea of living on mission and going everywhere is different. It's opposite. It's in contrast to what we're doing. And the reality is they're one and the same. That Jesus invites us to a life, and that life is on mission. It's not that Jesus invites you to do ministry. It's that Jesus invites you to live life and life to the fullest. And this paradigm shift that has to take place in the way that we view our lives, our places of work, our families, our relationships, is that so often, we talk about this repeatedly, we compartmentalize things, right? We have our church box where we do church things, like we go to an MC, we attend weekly services, we volunteer at soccer camp, we volunteer at 4th of July, I go to Reclaim's breakfast once a month. I do these things, and they're in this little box that I have off to the side. And then I have my family box, and I have my work box. And if I'm lucky, I have a little personal hobby box off to the side too, right? If we're all lucky, right? And Jesus says, like, away with the boxes. Like, that's not what I came here for. Like, I didn't die for you to have a Jesus box. I came to transform your life. And that requires intentionality. It requires us to change the way that we view things. So the first idea of go is this command. When you read it in Matthew, the Greek word for go and make disciples, the Greek for go is the command. The command is actually not make disciples, surprisingly, right? The command portion, the definitive, you must do this part of the sentence as it's laid out grammatically in the Greek, is go. So you can almost put like an exclamation point, go, and as you go, make disciples. It requires intentionality. Everything that Jesus does was intentional. And that challenge is not some unattainable goal for us, right? The go portion is highly, highly intentional for us, and we have to make sure that we're doing it at all times. So there's a couple of things that I constantly say to us, and I just want to remind us here at Awaken. Jeff says that I preach all the time, apparently, so you don't need to listen to my sermons. But what I'm saying this week is pretty relevant, I say all the time, and I just want to put it up here, that there are practices and habits that we need to unlearn, and new ones we must learn to replace them. There are things that you, right now, that you think, or whether or not you consciously or subconsciously believe it, you live out things in your life based on worldviews and values and systems that you've created that I would challenge you this morning that you need to unlearn. And this morning, I'm challenging you on the idea of evangelism. This idea that, one, it's the church structurally's job to organize and create programs for discipleship. That is false. It is a myth. It is not true. The idea around discipleship is that as we go, and there's a video that we've shared before, this idea that God never sent people out individually, right? He sends them out in pairs, sends them out as a family. He sends them out as a unit to go. So this is a twofold mission statement, right? It's as you go and live your everyday life at work, right? We're not going to, let's see, all right, so Charlie and I are both going to start selling cars together because God calls us to go on a mission together, right? That's not what I'm saying, although Charlie's a killer salesman and I might do okay. I would just enjoy hanging out with Charlie all day. But the reality is, I'm not going to change my employment to go follow this out to a T. What I'm suggesting to you is that you live your mission, one, as you go about your daily life. But two, as you have those intentional, strategic moments in your life, you do it with other people. If you're going to go, if you feel a calling, if you feel compelled to feed the homeless, please don't go do that alone. This isn't a safety conversation. It's because that's not how God designed us to do it. God designed you that as you go to bring people with you, both people who don't yet follow Jesus and people who do love Jesus, right? Because as we go on mission, there are people that may want to join in, who have even a heart for homelessness, who may all of a sudden experience the love of Jesus because they're on mission with you. So there's two parts to this idea. The second thing this morning that I want us to kind of begin to look at is this idea of the make disciples portion. It's the preach the gospel portion. It's the as we go. So the command is to go everywhere, but that intentionality has a message to it, right? That message is the good news. And so I want to kind of submit to you this idea this morning that we as the church, especially in the Western world, we have this different idea that we're actually more interested, if you look at the way we do it, we're more interested in converts than disciples. We're more interested in helping people just receive this spiritual salvation. I call it the Jesus heaven card, right? To punch the card, a ticket to go to heaven, if you will. We're more interested in that version of Christianity than this idea that actually God calls us to be transformed, to be made new, that He came so that we would live a life to the fullness as His disciples. So I guess if I had to give you this one statement here, I wrote it down for you guys to read with me together, that the command is not to make converts, the command is to make disciples. The command is not to make converts, the command is to make disciples. So we are a sent people. We are a people who God is constantly sending us out. Think about just our MCs for a minute, okay? We designed these home churches, these groups of people, these networks, these neighborhood families. We've designed them with the heart of not only caring for each other, but caring for the world around them. And MCs struggle to do both of these things because we as humans struggle to do both of these things. So as a pastor, when Jeff and I and Mike, when we sit down, we evaluate where are we growing, what things are going well, and what things could we improve on, right? As any leadership team does, there are regularly things in our MCs that we say, these things are going really well, and these things are not going well. And it's not like it's a general, like, well, all of our groups do this part really well, and all of our groups don't do this part well. It's just a general, hey, as humans, we're not good at doing both of these things well, and that's reflected in the DNA of our groups sometimes. It doesn't change the command, right? It's not like, well, this group's just going to be your care group. So if you just want to make some friends and hang out and have a care group, go to this group. If you want to hang out with your neighbors all the time, throw a party, have a lot of fun, go to this group. That's not what we're saying. It's a both and. We're saying that you need to make sure that you have both of those things at place in your life as individuals and as your MC. One of the things that I would just challenge you this morning, if you're taking notes, you just want to think through this maybe later on. My question to you first this morning is when was the last time that you talked to someone about Jesus? When was the last time that Jesus came up in a conversation? Was that conversation negative? Was it positive? Was it because they brought it up? Was it because you brought it up? There's not a right or wrong answer to this, right? But I want to ask you the question, and it should be hopefully a gut punch. It should knock the wind out of us a little bit this morning. When was the last time that you had a genuine conversation with someone about Jesus? And if it's been a while, this command may not be fully present in your life. There's two practical pathways that, in my opinion, that specifically speak to this one command. There are others as well, right? But one is reaching, the command of reaching. It's literally to go and to share the gospel, to bring hope to people around us. And the other one that I thought of this week was accountability, right? That we need accountability, that as we go, as we're reaching people around us, we need people in our life who can hold us accountable to not only continuing to do it, but to live intentionally on mission together. So as we think about this, Jesus at the core of this command is a missional God. He's a sending God. One of our core rhythms of our community, of our church family, is this idea of sending out. And if we're honest today, if we're just being truthful with ourselves, a lot of us have done a really good job of healing, and God's been doing some amazing healing in our lives. We're doing pretty good at the raising up. God's raising us up in community. We're starting to see ourselves grow and take steps within our MCs. Maybe you've gotten in an MC recently. Maybe you've started to to be part of the DC recently. You're doing some things to be raised to your fullness. But man, I think for a lot of us, it stops there. There's a lacking of that third rhythm of being sent out with intentionality to go everywhere. I'm not saying that we're failing. I just think there's an area of opportunity for us as a church. I think this is one area that we often put on other people. And so all of us, we're putting on the guy beside us, right? If we're all in a big circle, right? That guy beside me, that's his job, right? As we look around, all of a sudden, no one takes ownership over this idea that as we go, we're called to live and to share the gospel. Look at this passage from John chapter 20. This is Jesus towards the very end of his life. He says, "Peace be with you, and as the Father has sent me, so I am sending you." The Father is a sending God. He sends Jesus. Jesus sends the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit sends us out. So as I kind of conclude this morning, I want to give you a couple practical things that I want us to kind of think through. Right? There's a lot of great theology this morning. There's Greek commands, and there's all these things to it. But I want to give you a list of things this morning, 2 lists actually. The first one is, here's how to not obey this command. Here's how to not live on mission. Here's how to keep doing what you're doing, right? So here's how you can do that. Ready? You can fill your schedule, commute for family events. Always have your family events other places, right? Like you're not living in the neighborhood. You're not dwelling among the people in your life. You can just go do everything else somewhere else, right? We're always going down to the beach. We're always going to our friend's house. We're always going out to eat, right? We're always commuting. We don't actually, like we turn the lights on, we sleep here, but that's about it, right? You're commuting for all your events. You always stick to the plan, right? You OCD schedule planners like myself, you always stick to the plan. You don't serve or volunteer, right? Again, these are ways to not live on mission. So don't serve or don't volunteer. You only participate in the big events, the mission events, like the 4th of July, right? If that's the only opportunity you want to serve this whole year, that's you not living on mission, right? You're doing a great job. You're not celebrating with your friends and families, right? These are things that if you don't want to live on mission, all you have to do is just follow this list. I gave you a phenomenal list. You fill your schedule. You leave your home constantly. You don't hang out with friends and family. You show up to like the once or twice big events because you feel obligated or guilty to, right? These are ways to not live on mission. Now, let me invite you to a different way of living. Let me invite you to a way of living on mission, right? So if you're a note taker, maybe write down a few of these. My prayer, right? We're getting ready to worship in just a second. In our worship time, I really hope that you wrestle with some of these things. That maybe God would call you and challenge you to live these out. So I'm just going to run through this pretty fast, okay? They'll be on Facebook later on afternoon if you want to go back and look at it. So stay outside in your front yard longer when watering the yard, cutting the grass, weeding, whatever it is, right? Just stay outside in your front yard longer. Lollygag, procrastinate in the yard. Talk to neighbors. Walk your dog regularly or on the same time in your neighborhood. Meet the same people. Sit on the front porch. Let the kids play in the front yard. Invite neighbors over for dinner. Attend and be a part of your HOA. Attend the parties that you're invited to by your neighbors. Actually go to those things. Maybe in the wintertime, do a food drive or a coat drive and get your neighbors involved. Have a game night, yard games, board games, whatever the case is. Some of you are too competitive, and so you should not do this very often because it would actually not be an example of living the gospel out, okay? Grow a garden and then constantly give it away to people, right? Give extras away. Start a monthly open meal night in your home. Just invite people. Hey, every third Friday of the month, Arkham hosts a dinner. Come hang out. Do a barbecue on Friday nights. Invite others to hang out and contribute. Host a sports game watching party. Organize and host a ladies' paint and wine night. Some of you guys wrote that down. It's a note day. Take some notes here, guys. I'll wear a wig. I can paint. I'll do some wine night. Host a movie night. Start an exercise group with friends. Walk around. Jog in the neighborhood. Host a play date with other friends and stay-at-home moms. The idea is that you live in community. It's not hard. It's actually very simple. It just requires intentionality. If you want to obey the commands of Jesus to go everywhere, it requires you to be intentional, not add something to your plate. Please, as your pastor, as your friend, as a fellow Christ follower, I plead with you this morning to find a way to be intentional. As you read through the first chapter in John, the chapter where we kind of understand why Jesus is here in the first place, it's kind of his mission statement. We run across this one verse, and I want it to kind of be our final thought this morning. And this is John writing about Jesus. It says, "The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood." It's the Message version of this verse. And I took a class in Bible college, right? And one of the things about this verse in particular is actually a class about how do you find the most truthful statement, it's called exegesis. When you dive into Scripture and find the most truthful, what is the true meaning of what this Greek or Hebrew passage, what is it really saying? And out of all the translations out there, right, ironically, this one verse, the Message, says it better than any other translation out there. This idea of incarnational living, Mike would be proud we're using his incarnational word this morning if he was here. This idea that Christ came, he put on flesh and blood, and he moved into the neighborhood. May you and I this morning, as Christ followers, may we move into the neighborhood. May you be intentional with your way of life. May your marriage, may your family, may our church family, may we be a church that not only is sent out, but as we shared a few weeks ago, we want to be dedicated to a movement. That dedication to the movement is a movement of the good news. And dedication speaks to intentionality. There is a good news. It's a message of hope. And shame on us when we don't take that message of hope to other people around us. May you go everywhere with intentionality this week. Let's pray.